Welcome to Burns Bible Stories for Kids. I'm your host, Don Burns. I do the morning show with Rebecca each and every weekday morning from 5:30 to 8:30 on 90.9 KCBI. You're welcome to check it out. It's Mornings with Rebecca and Burns. I'm the Burns part. Anyways, we do this every Friday. It's Burns Bible Stories for Kids. And I've been sharing stories from the Jesus Storybook Bible. This is my grandson Judah's favorite book. He's 2 years old, and he's allowing his gramps to share these stories with you. And today our story is called The Warrior Leader, and it's about Joshua. And remember, we left the Israelites, they were in the desert wandering, and they got the 10 Commandments last week. Well, now we continue the story, and they're about to go into the Promised Land. After Moses had died, God gave his people a new leader. His name was Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land that God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in the baking hot desert for 40 years. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and anything yellow and tents and walking and just being hot. And how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. And there was just one problem: the city of Jericho. Jericho wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the land. The people looked at Jericho, at the big, giant, scary walls around it, at the tall, towering ramparts, and heavy iron gates that bolted it shut, and they stared at each other. What would they do? No one knew. But God knew, and God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised, because it was a very odd battle plan, as we'll soon find out. God made his people a promise. I will always be with you. I will never, ever leave you. If you do what I say, your lives in the new land will be happy and everything will go well. So Joshua gathered his army together. They had their swords, their spears, their shields, and they were ready to fight. But the plan wasn't about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God had said. Joshua's army went marching. And they marched around the city day after day after day. And the people of Jericho thought, they're too scared to fight. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. And on the seventh day, God told his people to march around the city not once, but 7 times. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they possibly could. Has anyone ever told you to make noise as much as you possibly can? Well, imagine that, and then add that noise to about 40,000 other people making as much noise as they could. And you would get the idea. It'd be very ear-splitting. As it turned out, stone-splitting as well, because the huge, strong walls of Jericho came crumbling to the ground as if they were made of sand. And Jericho vanished in a great cloud of dust. So it was that God's people entered their new home, and they didn't even have to fight to get in. They only had to walk and make noise. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. Now will you do what he says? And everyone said, we promise. Joshua said, only God can make your heart happy, so don't pray to pretend gods. They said, no, never. Well, I'm afraid they didn't keep their promise. They didn't do what God said, and many years later, just as God had warned them, things would go badly for God's people. They would lose their home. Enemies would capture them and take them off as slaves. And God's people would scatter into many different lands. God's plan was still working, though. One day he would give his people another leader and another home. But this home, no one could ever take from them. Thanks again so much for joining us for Burns Bible Stories for Kids. Love for you to leave comments if you want to. You can like and you can share with your friends as well. And then join us again next Friday morning at 11 o'clock right here. Burns Bible Stories for Kids.